Welcome back to Lambda Bible Studies, and Merry Christmas, one and all, and welcome back, Lee Templar. It's been a while since you've been on this channel, hasn't it?
Yeah, I've been not able to really be as online as I used to.
That's probably healthy for anybody, but I seem to remember you might have been on the very first ever Lambda Bible Studies stream, so you're an OG.
Yeah, one of the older ones.
One of the older ones, at least. And today we're debunking arguments against the biblical story of the nativity. Is that fair?
Yeah. A few. Every Christmas time these things come up, right? So might be useful to go over a few of them.
Yeah, you guys out there may or may not have encountered this, wandering the cursed aisles of the internet, being accosted by fedora-tipping atheists everywhere. So that is what we're here to help you with. And we're doing it in true internet style as a countdown from 5 to 1. What are the top 5 complaints? What are the 5 big reasons that people say that these are not genuine? So let me bring up. Oh, that should say 5. Oh, well. It just hasn't synced. But it doesn't matter. Number 5, Bethlehem versus Nazareth. This is only number 5, so maybe it's not such a big deal. But people say that it's more likely that Jesus was actually born in Nazareth, but there was this prophecy about Jesus having been born in Bethlehem. So they came up with this convoluted explanation that meant that Jesus had actually been born in Bethlehem and then went back to Nazareth. What do you think?
Well, I mean, a lot of this.
Oh, I've lost you. You've gone on mute. Possibly deliberately.
My bad. Not deliberately.
Go ahead.
Button. You might want to do a quick overview of it. Just like references in the gospel.
Oh yes. So in 2 of the 4 gospel accounts, we have an account of Jesus' birth, and the situation was that there was a census, and we'll be going into more details about the census itself later in the stream. But everybody was told to go back to kind of their homeland, their place of origin, instead of where they were currently living. So Joseph and Mary therefore traveled to Bethlehem specifically because the census needing to happen. And it just so happened that whilst they had traveled back was the exact moment that Mary came due, I guess, and Jesus was born. Hence why they didn't have anywhere to stay, and they had to go and plead for somebody to give them a shelter for the night, and they got stuck in with all the animals, and Jesus was then born amongst the little cute animals, the farm animals, which everybody makes a little model of over Christmas, and it's delightful. But I don't think it's supposed to be cute and cozy. That's not the vibes that you get as you read the narrative. It's more like, the squalor, how disreputable for this majestic king and the long-awaited Messiah to have been born in such a lowly place. So I think we slightly forget that these days. But anyway, this is all slightly off the point, because the accusation is that because out of you, little Bethlehem. Actually, shall I bring up that verse, because that's probably quite useful. There's a prophecy. It's like, out of you, least. I'll find the exact one. So Micah 5 verse 2. But you, Bethlehem Ephrathah, though you are small among the clans of Judah, out of you will come one who will be ruler over Israel. So actually, even in that prophecy, you see this theme where the one who will rule over Israel will come from this small clan, this kind of insignificant place of Bethlehem Ephrathah. So to then have Jesus also being born in a stable doubles down on that symbolism that the king wasn't going to be born in a mighty palace, but was going to be born in this tiny place in the outskirts. So I suppose the argument is that since two of the Gospels don't even account for Jesus' birth, that as a later point, somebody came up with the idea of, I know, why don't we concoct that Mary and Joseph were in Bethlehem when Jesus was born, and therefore this prophecy in Micah was true.
Yeah, I mean,
and I think one of the reasons.
Sorry.
One of the reasons this is a bit tricky is because I think John is one of the ones that doesn't record this. His gospel is usually considered to be one of the later ones. So that's a bit of a wrinkle in this argument.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense that I think Bethlehem was where Joseph was from, possibly. That's why they were there.
Right.
And so like if they're traveling towards Jerusalem, there and back, Nazareth is up in I think Samaria, and Bethlehem is closer to Jerusalem. So Bethlehem was historically a kind of a like a how like you have hotels outside of a main city, so you can avoid the traffic. So it's kind of like a little tiny I think in terms of London, you might compare it to Gatwick, where it's like it's not London. It's not London, but there's an airport there, and you can spend a hotel there to avoid London when you first arrive, right?
Yeah, right. Okay. So interesting.
And so there's been
I've got a map I could share if that's useful.
Sure. Yeah.
There we go. So and Asta points out that the more likely thing is not always what happens in history. In fact, when people are writing fiction, they tend to write the convenient and tidy thing. So the fact that it doesn't seem straightforward is sometimes a clue that it is real. Yeah. So here's a map, and here we can see Jerusalem and Bethlehem right next to each other here.
So if you're heading towards Jerusalem,
Nazareth, all the way up here. So this is where Jesus grew up, right?
Yeah. That's why he was called.
He was born all the way over here.
Yeah. So and the specific term they use, I might be wrong, but I think the specific Greek word they use for the hotel that they were in, it means more like family house, I think, or like family estate.
Huh.
So it's not like, I don't think it was a commercial hotel. It was like a family inn outside of Jerusalem.
Okay.
And whoever,
that's interesting.
Yeah, whoever Joseph's relatives who were running it, they didn't want the guy marrying the single mother to like shame the family in the inn. So go out back and take a spare room out back.
Yeah, keep quiet. Don't talk to the people in the house. That is a good point. That hotel is a little bit anachronistic, I guess. It's like you imagine there being a hotel inn with Lenny Henry or something. But
yeah, it would be more accurate to say Mary and Joseph were heading to like the family B&B or something, like a bread and breakfast. Like your auntie or your grandma has turned her old building, her old house into like a bed and breakfast. Bed and breakfast. What's that app?
An Airbnb.
Yeah, like it's the family Airbnb, right? Like grandma or like uncle is living there with the animals. The animals are underneath the house. So essentially, like the way the architecture of this works, if I remember correctly, is that like the actual inn and people are on the second floor, and the animals are on the first floor. It kind of creates it's a very vertical structure, and it kind of creates like a heat column, basically. So they're like, why don't you stay downstairs and it's not mess up our reputation with like this like unmarried man with a pregnant woman. So
Good.
yeah, that it seems like they would have like wanted to go there. I mean, maybe they wanted to go to Bethlehem because everyone in Nazareth was looking at them like single mama with unmarried
Mm,
man. So they may have left for. I mean, they left for the census, but they may have been very motivated to leave also because of the shame. Um,
yeah.
but yeah, it was next to Jerusalem. It's like closer to home for Joseph's family, and they can like kind of like privately have the baby in secret, basically. But they also fled to Egypt, so it's a nice waypoint towards Egypt. In the meantime, so like Jesus' childhood basically circulates between Nazareth, Bethlehem, and probably Alexandria. They never say what city in Egypt they fled to, but it's probably Alexandria. Um, so you would have those three areas, but basically like yeah, he grew up in Nazareth. He was born kind of in secret in Bethlehem at the family farm. And
Mhm.
then ran away to Egypt and like wait till people forget about this, right? If you disappeared for like 3 years or something and you come back with a baby and wife, people will be like, oh, he must have found like that wife or something. I don't know.
So Matthew and Luke are the two gospels that mention Bethlehem. Um, so obviously, it's a common accusation that says that most of the details of Jesus's life are in the Bible, which is a single document, and therefore there's no corroboration. But actually, the Bible is a bunch of different sources. Matthew and Luke are kind of separate. If you found them archaeologically, you'd say, oh, these are two corroborating sources.
Yeah, and they used to be two different sources that were later merged.
Written with
Around the
very
first
different
century.
audiences as well, right? Matthew is
Yeah,
definitely written for Jewish readers, and Luke is definitely written for Gentile readers.
yeah, and well, academic readers too. Just like
Mm,
getting all the sources. Yeah, so that's basically like the explanation of like this is one of those supposed contradictions that really doesn't exist because there's no actual contradicting like
right. Yeah.
evidence really. It's just like one
Just
is
complete
more so
speculation
yeah,
versus the thing that's actually got evidence.
yeah, there are claims against it which have like actual historic records. This just seems to be a more of a well, I don't like the fact that these two books don't explain it enough rather than anything
Mm,
contradicting.
good. All right. The virgin birth, and in particular, what I'm meaning here is the idea from comparative religion that there were a bunch of different pagan myths, Horus or Mithras or Krishna, that involved the key character having been born of a virgin and potentially having some divinity or sort of demigod status or something like this, and therefore Jesus's mythic origin is not historical. It's just an unoriginal copy of existing pagan myths. What do we think of that?
A lot of those claims are not mentioning key details. Like sometimes Athena is called a virgin birth in Greek mythology, but it's because she was born out of a forehead instead of the womb. It's not because she
Huh.
doesn't have a father.
Really
So
interesting.
like yeah, Zeus is the daughter of sorry, Athena's the daughter of Zeus if I remember correctly, and it's because somehow Zeus impregnated the forehead rather than the womb. So it's like she still has a father. It's just like you
Right.
forgot to mention.
You're
So
really
anyway,
stretching there.
the horror stuff is
There-
I think that's been done to death in terms of disproving. It's just made up. It doesn't actually exist in Egyptian literature.
There's a lot of grifting in the anti-Christian debate scene, isn't there? I remember that there was a video. I came across it again recently. Christopher Hitchens talking about the Ten Commandments, and he offhandedly says that there are. He says there are at least four different versions of the Ten Commandments in the Bible. And on the screen at the time, I think it was Vanity Fair or something like this, put this video up, and they popped up Bible references, 8 different like Bible references. So having watched this video 10 years ago, I sort of just bought that little moment had subconsciously made me assume that, yeah, I guess the Ten Commandments are like described 8 different places in the Bible. I don't know why I thought this, because obviously, I've read through all the books in question, and I've, you'd have thought I'd remember it being repeated over and over again. But this time I actually stopped and looked up all of the verses, all the references that got popped up on the screen, and half of them were just random verses that had nothing to do with the Ten Commandments. So they were just like randomly spamming the screen with Bible verses to kind of, I guess, illustrate, if you were to be charitable, they were like, this is what Bible references look like. Or to be less charitable, to trick the people watching into thinking that these were kind of footnotes to the video. Like, oh, we've done our homework. Here are all of the restatements of the Ten Commandments with all the differences. I mean, in reality, you've got one statement of them that most people go to in Exodus 20, and then there's another one at the beginning of Deuteronomy somewhere, and they aren't exactly wildly different from one another. There's just some slight differences in wording. So there you go.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, Deuteronomy is imagined to be like the text found when the Book of the Law was rediscovered, and they had to like modernize the Hebrew in the sense that it was the 500s BC rather than the 1000s BC. So, Hebrew had evolved over the 500
So it's
years,
like the King James versus the New King James, or
sort of, yeah. Like the Bible the Old Testament has several different linguistic eras. There's like the archaic Hebrew era, the classical Hebrew era, the Aramaic era, which borrows heavily from like Arabic words and stuff like that. So like like in Daniel, God is occasionally called Allah in the original language, but it's it's spelled Aella. Well, it's same thing. It doesn't matter. And because under the Persian Empire and the Babylonian Empire, a lot of Arabic influences came into the language. So Elohim becomes Elohai. Same way they say Allahu Akbar. It's like Allahu and Elohi are like kind of like cousin words of each other. So like these are basically the differences between the texts, areas of the text. It's not actually a different sentence. It's a different language era saying the same thing.
Yeah. So just to summarize once again, you mentioned that a lot of the pagan stories of virgin births are a stretch. They're not really virgin births. There is some kind of sexual union. There's just they're kind of claiming that these are all the same thing because it sounds like you can make the Bible sound derivative.
Yeah, I think the only I'm not sure, but I think there might be something like a virgin birth in like Hindu literature, but it's like, and then people say, "Oh, Jesus must have copied Hinduism." It's like, how did he get across the Persian Empire during all those wars with the Romans? like you have the people that claim Jesus went to India. It's like, how did he cross the DMZ? It's like, it's not exactly easy to do that.
Yeah. Well, yeah. The idea that somehow the people who were making up the New Testament were more well-read, multicultural scholars
than the Romans, right?
Yeah.
It's like, I'm
it's
sure
kind of crazy.
This impoverished Levantine fisherman somehow had your level of intellect as the internet, but the Romans didn't, right? It's like kind of ridiculous.
Right. It's in the same order as if you were like, if you had the same, is it the Mormon idea that Jesus visited America?
Yeah.
But you also thought that Jesus wasn't divine. You were like, okay. My version is that Jesus traveled to India, traveled to America. he was in China. He took all these ideas from sub-Saharan Africa. But I'm also completely an atheist. This guy just was an incredible traveler.
Yeah, like somehow he
storyteller.
discovered the new world and didn't tell anyone. A lot of silly
Yeah.
stuff. Yeah, I mean,
I
there
don't
are.
think that Krishna is considered to have had a virgin birth in
Yeah, it's
Hindu
probably like a later.
scriptures.
It's probably a later development that they copied from the West. It's
Yeah, the copying is the
that
other way around.
yeah. There's not
I
really
tell you
like
where the idea of a virgin birth does pre-exist Jesus is in Isaiah.
yeah.
Therefore, the Lord himself will give you a sign. The virgin will conceive and give birth to a son and will call him Emmanuel. I mean, the word virgin there is the same word, I think, as the word for young
Young woman.
woman.
Yeah, and
But
this
it's
that's
not that
funny.
much of a sign to say that a young woman will conceive and give birth to a son. That's like pretty normal.
Well, also like a non-virginous young woman would not be the vessel that God would choose if the Isaiah prophecy is true. So it's like it's the arguments against it are self-contradicting. It's like would your this happens a lot with Judaism in terms of like trying to reinvent the classic language and saying, oh, it's just a young woman. It's like, why would your God pick like a prostitute for your Messiah? It's kind of self-insulting. Now
Right.
Christians would be less like prone to judge like that, but at the same time, it's like, yeah, but this is obviously meaning a virgin because an unmarried young woman is supposed to be a virgin if she's involved with God's plan.
And just to dive into one of these other comparative religious ones, because I've got quite interested in ancient Egypt recently. I've got,
Nice.
there's all these YouTube channels about the pyramids.
Oh boy.
And they're pretty fascinating. I mean, you've got to admit, the pyramids are pretty cool, right?
Yeah,
Do you
pretty cool.
admire the pyramids on a pure architectural level?
Yeah. I mean, like it's sometimes forgotten that in terms of the pyramids that are like actually still standing and good, the Egyptians only built them for about 250 years of their like vast history.
Wow.
So it was kind of
Crazy.
like it was like a fad, and then once the fad passed, they stopped caring. But like when people think of Egypt, it's all they think about, even though like the pyramid making pyramids constitutes like less than 10% of Egyptian history.
Well, is it also true that if you had a time machine and went back to the time when the pyramids were being constructed, it wouldn't have been this bleak wasteland of desert? It would have actually been a flourishing, verdant, green, beautiful, abundant place that has
Along
since
the Nile,
dried up.
yeah. There's currently a golf course next to the pyramids in Egypt that's very well watered and green. And if you stand in that golf course and look at the pyramids, it's like that's kind of what it was like in the heyday.
Yeah. But anyway, so Horus was not born of a virgin so much as that I think there was some form of kind of posthumous sex between Isis and Osiris. I don't know. I don't think it's particularly consistent mythos, but that
Egyptian mythology evolves because again, like they have like three major eras with their own mythologies contained in each, like the early kingdom, the middle kingdom, the late kingdom, and like each of these their mythology goes through repeated revisions in every epoch because they're like their civilization collapsed 3 times, so like they're reinventing their religion after the collapse and piecing together the pieces.
So anyway, that's probably enough on this topic, but quite interesting anyway. All right, Magi. This is something I've heard you mention before. So it's quite interesting. The Magi, we get to go back to the kind of quaint little scenes that we build and put up around Christmas time. We often have the Mary and Joseph and the little manger and the animals and then the shepherds and then the Magi, and they're all there kind of they arrive on the same day and this all happens in one moment. How accurate is that picture?
Probably not really. Does the text ever say that the Magi visited Jesus in Bethlehem? I'm trying to remember.
I don't think so. Should we have a quick look?
Yeah. Quick look.
So the Magi visit in Matthew 2. Let me just read that quickly. So after Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea, during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem and asked, "Where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him." When King Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. When he'd called together all the people's chief priests and the teachers of the law, he asked them where the Messiah was to be born. "In Bethlehem, in Judea," they replied, "for this is what the prophet has written. But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah." This is the quote from Micah. "For out of you will come a ruler who will shepherd my people." Then Herod called the Magi secretly and found from them the exact time the star had appeared. He sent them to Bethlehem and said, "Go and search carefully for the child. As soon as you find him, report to me so that I too may go and worship him." And they had heard the king and went on their way. And the star they had seen when it rose went ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were overjoyed. On coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother Mary, and they bowed down and worshipped him. Blah, blah, blah. So if you notice, you can see how people might get this confused, because after Jesus was born in Bethlehem, they go to King Herod. They get this prophecy about Bethlehem being the place Jesus was going to be born. He had already been born, but King Herod didn't know this. So Herod sends them to go to Bethlehem, and then the Magi follow the star to where Jesus is, which it doesn't say is Bethlehem. So they'd been sent to Bethlehem by Herod, but they didn't exactly follow his instructions, and they went to where Jesus was, and then warned him because, Herod was not really going to try and worship him. That wasn't actually his plans.
It's kind of implied also because the star moved, so like it moved where Jesus was moving. So like when the family, because it says that the star went to their house, not the end. That's a big.
Indeed, if you're not reading carefully, it would be easy to think that they're still in Bethlehem. And that the star had gone to their house in Bethlehem.
But they didn't have a house in Bethlehem.
Maybe, but
no, that because like it was the inn that was in Bethlehem. Their house was in Nazareth.
Yeah, so, maybe they at some point thought, actually, we quite like it here, and then they bought a house.
Well, no, because there's actually two locations that the star could have gone to. It could have gone to Nazareth, but that would have required to be after they had fled to Egypt. So it's implied that it would have been years later, or they could have gone to Egypt. It's never really discussed. They could have gone to Egypt to find them there. They fled to Egypt rather quickly after the birth in Bethlehem.
Yeah, let me keep reading so for people who haven't read this before know what happens. So when the Magi had gone, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream. "Get up," he said, "take the child and his mother and escape to Egypt. Stay there until I tell you, for Herod is going to search for the child to kill him." So he got up, took the child and his mother during the night, and left for Egypt, where he stayed until the death of Herod. And so was fulfilled what the Lord had said through the prophet, "Out of Egypt I called my son." When Herod realized that he'd been outwitted by the Magi, he was furious and gave orders to kill all the boys in Bethlehem and its vicinity who were 2 years old or under, in accordance with the time he had learned from the Magi. As in,
2 years had gone by.
2 years had gone by, yeah.
So that's the thing. Like this story, the details in the story imply that the Magi are actually arriving years after Christ was born.
Yeah.
That Jesus is already 2 years or so.
So the shepherd probably did visit the child right as it was born in Bethlehem, whereas the Magi probably didn't even show up for a couple of years.
And again,
at which point they may have been. Do you not think they went to Nazareth and then to Egypt and then back to Nazareth afterwards, or do you think they spent 2 years living in Bethlehem?
No, it sounds to me like they fled to Egypt for 2 years or more.
Okay, yeah. Yeah.
And so if they're in
Herod
Egypt,
was waiting for 2 years to find
yeah.
out from the Magi what had happened.
Well, yeah, like
Yeah.
I think at a certain point he realized he'd been had, and the Magi were just like, "See ya," because the Magi never go back to Herod. They never go back. They're like, this is all sus. I'm just not gonna go back to. We're just not gonna
Right.
go. Now, of course,
Yeah.
the Egyptian the Magi Magi or the priesthood of Persia. They're priests of Persia. In the Old Testament, Daniel was made their chief, so they would have known. Like they were kind of like the smart guys in the court, like the court scientists. They would have been educated on locations, where to go, and astronomy and stuff like that. So, like, they're probably working on things that Daniel had told their ancestors centuries before. Um, I think I've mentioned on other streams that there are actual star constellations that appear to be things the Magi would have used to identify Jesus.
It's
Involving
interesting.
yeah, I think it was in 1 AD or something that Jupiter considered the king. I think Murdoch or something, like it was like the Murdoch star or the king star. I forget, but so like the star that represents the king or a king was in Virgo, the Virgin, for 9 months. So from their perspective,
Mm.
they see this king in the tummy, this is also another reason why the virgin birth is confirmed, because the constellation is literally called Virgo Virgin. Um, so Jupiter the King was in Virgo for 9 months. It went into retrograde, kind of like the way a baby turns before it's being born, and then it exited from in between the legs of Virgo. And so this would have been seen as a sign by the Magi that a king had been born from a virgin. I suspect
Ah.
Jupiter. I suspect Jupiter was the star they were following as it was entering retrograde. I don't know.
Well, they would have had Isaiah. I would have thought then with the Persians and the Magi have had the prophecies. I mean, didn't Nebuchadnezzar convert, as it were, to Christianity? I don't know. I never really followed after that whether that stuck, but
Yeah, I know. Yeah, it's vague. Nebuchadnezzar acknowledges Elohim as the high god, and then
right.
and then he still dies basically. So he like kind of dies shortly afterwards.
Well, yeah, and he goes mad, doesn't he? Anyway, we've got off
Yeah,
on a big tangent here, but
yeah. Point is,
but
it's the Magi either went to Nazareth after they had returned from Egypt, or went to
Mhm.
Egypt where they were hiding. Um,
Right.
it's not clear, but they were. I don't think they were in Bethlehem.
Okay. Um, Quirinius and the census.
Yeah,
So this is something that we touched on earlier and was kind of mentioned here, but I guess the accusation here is that the dating doesn't add up. Quirinius doesn't become governor until 2 years after Herod died. So the Bible says that this census took place under Herod and was administrated by Quirinius, but those couldn't have happened because those two characters never overlapped. That's the complaint. Or that's one of
yeah.
the complaints, at least. The other complaint
I,
is that there's no, supposedly, there's no external source that records that a census took place. Is that right?
I think a census is recorded, but it was like years later.
Okay,
Um,
right. Yeah, maybe that's it. Yeah.
so for this, I think people have to recognize like two things. One, the Roman Empire had only just recently started like conquering these areas. It had taken Galatia and Sicilia in Anatolia. It had taken Syria. It had taken Egypt and Palestine, all within like a few decades. And so these are new provinces that had never been under Roman rule.
Hmm.
Um, the Romans were running a lot of census at the time, and I personally think you could particularly think that the biblical writers we're probably viewing all of these census across the region as a single census. There were
Mhm.
censuses in Quirinius had started doing censuses years prior in Anatolia, in the provinces that he had conquered, in Sicilia and Galatia, in Anatolia, and so he was just like making his way down south from Anatolia, conquering areas there into Syria, Lebanon, Israel, Palestine, stuff like that. So like, um, I suspect that Luke is simply treating each individual census for the provinces that he was conquering as a single census of the region, which technically is true.
So yeah, so the reality is that the Romans were like, we ought to kind of do some administration and figure out who's living where as we
Yeah, yeah,
grow, as we conquer. Let's try and figure out what's going on. The way that that was carried out was a series of individual censuses in different regions at different times by different people. But what Luke is describing then is just the broad activity that was going on at the time of the
yeah.
Romans trying to get a handle on what was happening.
Yeah, and a lot of these areas were conquered by Quirinius, and I forget the name of his general, but these are people that were conquering the region. And again, like, largely the tax codes in this area, I don't think they had been updated very much since like Alexander the Great conquered them. So these were pretty outdated records, yeah, like by a
Right.
few centuries. So
Wow.
the Greeks weren't exactly known for doing a lot of like census data very often in these areas. The Persians did it better, but the Persians had lost to Alexander the Great, and so like areas like Anatolia, Lebanon, Syria, that had been conquered by Alexander's generals after he had died, they kind of just sat and like ate tax money and didn't care. They're very lazy leaders. And so when the Romans conquered this area, it's like, can it's kind of like you're America and you conquer Iraq and the tax records are from the British Empire. You're like, maybe we need to update this to know if we can get some more money out of the taxes, because
Ah,
like the population had like grown significantly since Alexander the Great, and the population maybe it wasn't Alexander the Great when it was the last census. It was probably like a couple of a number of decades, if not a century, since like serious investigation had been done in terms of like who lives here, how many people live here, and how much money you got for Rome. Because if Rome can find an excuse to raise your taxes, they're gonna take it. They're gonna do that. And so I think Quirinius. I was just looking it up. Let me see. Can never
so
quite remember.
I've seen dates that Quirinius was governor from sort of 6 AD, whereas Herod died 10 years earlier in 4 BC. So there's like a 10-year gap, I guess, depending on how you date it, where you say, okay, if Quirinius was the one who was doing the census, he couldn't even have started it until Herod had already been dead for 10 years. As in, so to be clear, Luke mentions Quirinius, whereas Matthew talks about Herod's reign. So
Yeah.
if we're going to take all of the sources as being totally accurate, which is what I think we're trying to defend here, um, if you're willing to loosen up your requirements to the source's accuracy, obviously all of these wash away in a flood of who cares.
Yeah.
But I think I try to defend a real strong view of biblical inerrancy. So let's
So,
go. Let's shoot for the stars here.
yeah. So Quirinius, just to review his military history, he conquers Crete and Cyrene. I think Cyrene is in Syria or something like that, or Anatolia, in 14 BC.
Mm-hmm.
And in 12 BC, he's named consul by Augustus. So he's like kind of like starting his administrative role after he conquered these areas. So that's
Mm-hmm.
as consul, he would have like had a bunch of people to like run censuses for him in Crete and the coast of Anatolia. Um,
Uh-huh. Did he
sometime
become
between,
governor of Syria in 6 AD? Is that the thing I was thinking
I
of?
think so. I'm just reading through it.
Okay,
Between
yeah.
12 and 1 BC, he led a campaign against Hormondes, a tribe based in the mountainous regions of Galatia and Sicilia.
They must have
That
been
would have
very
been
excited. Like, what are we counting down to? 1
yeah.
BC, 0 BC.
Around 5 to 3 BC, he was legate of Galatia, so he would have been again like doing legal administration bullshit in northern Anatolia. So he moves from Crete in the southern coast of Anatolia to the mountains of northern Anatolia, and then he's like
What
sent
is Anatolia?
south.
Is that like Turkey?
Turkey, yeah.
Okay.
In 1 AD, Quirinius had been appointed a personal tutor to Augustus, so he took a little break from his campaigning. And then I think he was, I don't know if he was governor of Syria actually. I think that might have been later. But
Okay.
so when Herod the Elder was exiled in 6 AD, Judea came under the Roman administrative rule with Copernicus, Coponius appointed as prefect. At the same time, Quirinius was appointed legate of Syria, with instructions to assess Judea province for taxation provinces. So that would have been 6 AD rather than like maybe 4 BC when Jesus was probably born. So essentially, this guy had been like, other than the brief stint he did as a tutor for Augustus, he had basically been like conquering Anatolia, Syria, Crete, Galatia, Syria, Sicilia since 14 BC. So like even like 14 years before Jesus is born, he's like fixing administrative details, fixing a bureaucracy, probably taking censuses of various areas. So he's like gradually making this motion throughout the region, trying to carve out his own like little tax estate essentially. And so if you're Luke and you know this guy's history, you might be inclined to say, yeah, Augustus said to take a census of the world, i.e., everything he had been conquering in that area, which would have been a lot, not just Judea. Judea was simply the census that was going on in these different areas finally got to Judea in 6 BC.
Yeah.
Another thing to recognize is that, censuses take time. They're not things that you just say one day and you get.
Yeah.
Just to give
Somebody
context.
declares we're going to do it, and then you start thinking,
Yeah.
okay, how are we going to hand this? How are we going to? Who's in charge? What's the
Yeah.
timetable? And
Like,
it could roll on for years.
for a comparison, the United States with railroads and telegraphs doing a census, it was the last by hand census. I think it was 1870 or something. That census of the continental United States, with the benefit of telegraphs and railroads, but they did not have tabulation machines. It took a decade. It took 10 years to do the entire United States with
Yeah.
light speed travel over telegraphs. So it takes time to do a census by horseback and boat. This is something that's going to take a few years. You're counting millions upon millions of people throughout all of Turkey, Syria, Lebanon, Crete, the coast of Anatolia, which were like big Greek city states. Each one of these cities is like 100,000 people or something, or 70,000 people, depending on how old it is. And that's going to take a while. So it makes sense that he would start doing the census in 14 BC and gradually make his way through all the conquests into Syria and Anatolia and everything, and then eventually get to Judea around the time of 6 AD. From a historian's perspective, this is just a broad campaign by Rome to conquer and tax and administrate the East, which started with Augustus's coming to power in, I think it was 14 BC that Augustus came to power, and would have, maybe I'm wrong about that, but like it would have continued through his emperorship as he conquered the East. And stabilized the East from the former Alexandrian kingdoms and brought it into Roman administration. So like this idea that it's off by 10 years, I'm like, yeah, I would imagine it would, because you're sending people to every town across this entire region for a census. It probably would take 10 years between when it was ordered and when it was actually done.
So something that people do bring up on this score is that Joseph is traveling to Bethlehem because he was of the tribe of David, right? And David was from Bethlehem. So it was kind of an ancestral home. But would the Romans really have asked for people to travel to their ancestral? Well, like, why would the Romans have cared
I
about
don't I
this
don't
kind of
think
Jewish
the Romans
perspective on tribes and such?
I don't think that's a Roman thing, but it may have been honestly Joseph might have been doing a tax evasion, if I'm being honest. This area has a lower tax rate than the richer provinces
Right.
of the north. I think I'm just gonna go to Bethlehem and get the tax documents there. This is not an unusual thing. Like I mean, I
It's
don't want to say to people,
believable.
you're a Jewish man in the Roman Empire. You probably want to look for what area has the lowest taxes.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm not outside like thinking like if I was Joseph at that time period, I do not want to be in Syria because Syria is a very wealthy province that's probably going to have a very high tax rate. Like maybe I want to just live in Bethlehem during the census to get the lower tax
This
rate, and then I'll go somewhere else.
this is like everyone leaving California to go and live in Texas. This is the
Yeah,
same kind
yeah.
of behavior.
I'm not saying this as any authority or any proof. I'm just saying like Bethlehem is a town of a few hundred people that are dirt poor. You would probably
Right.
want the tax rate there, not the tax rate
Yeah, yeah.
in Jerusalem or something.
Which is interesting with the idea of it being a family home as well, that they ended up
Yeah.
in, that maybe people in, if you had any connections in Bethlehem, you'd say, "Can you please just tell the Roman authorities that we live with you?"
Yeah.
Even though they'd
I
be
mean, like,
like, "That's weird that this little family house is packed to the absolute rafters with people who seem to have a
you
Syrian
see,
accent."
you register it as an inn, right? Or rather, it was an
Yeah,
inn, and then they turned it into a house, and now it's an inn again.
yeah. There's no room. Well, that's weird because I thought everyone was just going to, you know, to where they were from. How come this little place suddenly doesn't seem to have enough room to fit everybody? Isn't that suspicious?
Yeah, there's a lot of things people did to avoid taxes. There's a common saying that this is much later in the Roman Empire, but like there are funny insults you'll see in letters, like there are different provinces of the Roman Empire insulting each other the same way. You know how like the Welsh and English like make insulting jokes at each other. So
Mhm.
there's an Italian joke in I forget what it's from like the third or fourth century, but this Italian is writing about Gaul, and he's like, the finest art that Gaul practices is tax evasion.
Very good.
So
Well,
these are
it's
yeah.
I was going to say it is funny how human human nature does seem so constant. Stuff seems so
Yeah.
relatable
I'm
from the past.
people make a big deal of, "Oh, why is Joseph moving around so much and switching addresses and hiding out?" It's like, "M my dude, do you know what what Roman taxes are like?"
Right. And I think that brings us to our final topic, which is the massacre of
Yeah.
the innocent.
So,
As we briefly mentioned sooner, but tell us more about this.
yeah, that's the command of Herod to kill all the 2 years and under boys of Bethlehem, and the argument goes that, yeah, there is no historic documentation of this. My argument against it is, why would there be? Bethlehem was a town of a few hundred people. The number of boys he killed is probably gonna be, like, 10, maybe.
The
It's
same
not like
people who are arguing that there's no record of the massacre of the innocent were quite ready to believe that Canada had been massacring Christian schools in
yeah,
Canada
yeah,
had been killing
exactly.
children,
So,
native
like,
children, for hundreds of years.
people hear massacre and they think it's like Egypt where, like, like, the children of, like, hundreds of thousands of Jews were killed. It's like a genocide. This is a small town. Look up what Bethlehem is on Google sometime. It's still a small town to this day. But, like, it was a town of a few dozen houses. It was literally like a gas station. So, if a Roman emperor goes to, like, a gas station and kills 10 boys, I mean, that doesn't often make the news because it's just what
Mm.
Romans do. They're brutal. Not every massacre of, like, a local town is gonna be recorded by the Romans, because if it doesn't matter, it's not a major city. It's not even a historically relevant city yet. But
Mhm.
it's one of those things where it's like, yeah, I mean, if you consider the population of Bethlehem at the time of Jesus, where it was like top 700 people maybe. So that's like, maybe 100 families or something like that. Considering the birth rate, it may have been 100 or 200 families. You're looking at like killing about 10 people. It's not a genocide per se. It's not a Holocaust. It's not thousands of bodies that you're looking for. You're looking for like 10 bodies at most, maybe.
Should we take the modern version of a tour?
Sure.
This is the much cheaper version of doing a Holy Land tour that you can just sit on YouTube and watch someone clicking around in. So here's Bethlehem, here's Jerusalem, right?
Yeah. I think it's like apartment buildings nowadays. It's not much. It's like it looks like a little shire basically.
Should we drop the little orange man in and have a look around?
Yeah. There's a few apartment buildings. You see, it's
I feel like I'm there.
there.
Modern technology, eh?
And most of these are just shops nowadays. Like no one really lives here, really. So it's like,
right.
These are just like tourist businesses. Oh, look, a Crusader flag. Do you see on the right there? Just like Muslim guys selling. Oh, the Georgian flag. Sorry, never mind. Like.
What's this shepherd's beer?
Yeah, like this is look at zoom in on that. Look at that. Look at that beer. Like this is
what's in this little.
I
can't see what's in this tunnel.
Take a screenshot of Shepherd's beer. I kind of want to photograph him. Shepherd's beer. I kind of want to.
That should have been the thumbnail for the stream.
Copy the address to me. I can just right click and copy the address. I kind of want to grab a screenshot of that later.
Okay, I'll send it to you in.
23 Milton Frodo Street. So like
there you
go. Thank you. This is Bethlehem. It's a tourist trap. There's a few homes. it's a bit of a meme.
But it's kind of you can still. It feels kind of interesting to be in a place today, even if it looks very different from how it would have done 2,000 years ago. You can kind of get a feel for.
Now, this is probably a good overview if you can see down that road. It's like a little tiny
I was
shire
thinking
sized area.
We can see over this barbed wire.
Yeah, that's a good view right there. That's a good view of the town. So you see how it's like just like scattered apartment buildings?
Mm-hmm.
Today it's a few thousand people, but back then it was
right. This doesn't feel like a major metropolis even today, does it?
That little core area right there, go left more. That little hilltop, that's like probably one of the main that's probably where historic Bethlehem would have been or something. It's kind of like a very spread out, tiny touristy town, even to this day.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, nowadays it has a few thousand people, but in Jesus' day it would have been a few hundred people.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, anywhere that has had 2,000 years to grow surely has. I mean, if I know anything about compound interest.
Yeah.
There you go, a bit of a view out the side. Well, this has saved us all thousands of pounds worth of holiday planning to do our
you're actually
tour
no longer
of the Holy Land.
You're actually
we're not in Bethlehem anymore.
Yeah, it's that small. You're already outside Bethlehem.
let's just head the other side of the town center and see what's. That's not going to let me.
You have to click. Google's weird. You have to click with the road where you want to go. You don't click and drag.
Oh.
Yeah, just click a road you want to be in.
There we go. All right. So I get the feeling that it's all kind of like this, really.
Yeah. It's a very small area. So, like, if people, like, there's always the idea of, where are the bodies? I'm like, why would there be, like, bodies for, like, 10 dead kids? Maybe 20 dead kids. It's like, if you have a standard population distribution of 700 people, you're gonna have like less than 100 people that are kids, and maybe less than 200 people that are kids, and like a few dozen that are like actually babies. So it's like it's just you wouldn't really see any bodies. It wouldn't be like a mass genocide. It would be like a dozen or two dead kids.
And an operation that was probably on the hush hush as well.
Yeah. I mean, like Israel.
This wasn't something they were bragging about. This was like,
yeah,
the prophecy says somebody who's been born in this little town is going to replace me. So we don't want anyone getting any bright ideas. Easier to finish them off when they're 2 than crucify them when they're 30. This is kind of Herod's version of the if you had a time travel machine and you could go and find Hitler when he was when he was still a baby. Like,
so like I could also like be kind of like mean spirited and be like, I mean, like, you don't know all the genocides that like go on between Israel and Palestine today, even, and that's like hundreds of people, and you can't find all the bodies. Like, you can't find those hundreds of bodies. What's 20 people? Like, you're not going to find it.
Yes, and at a time that was even less civilized, you could argue, in quotes.
Like, the Romans pretty regularly decimated communities and battalions that they wanted to punish, and we do not have the records for the vast majority of those decimations where you kill one in every 10 people, basically. They're just like occasionally mentioned, but we know they did them often. And this wasn't even Romans. This was still under Herod. So Herod doing this without the Romans noticing by his his elite guard. Nobody's really going to record that, really.
Yeah. So kind of two things then to summarize this point. One, there was probably only a dozen or a couple of dozen infants killed in this event anyway. And we know that Herod committed a bunch of atrocities, so many that they're not even all mentioned by Roman historians or Jewish historians, like Josephus.
Yeah, he was overthrown for it too.
Systematically record the whole lot. So yeah. And by the way, this is a different Herod to the Herod who shows up at the other end of Jesus' life. Yeah.
Yeah, father and son.
Yeah. And Matthew mentions this, the massacre of the innocents, but it's not mentioned by any of the other gospel writers. But it's Matthew who's particularly intent on showing how Jesus's life fulfills prophecy.
Yeah.
And in this case, it's probably particularly referencing Jeremiah 31, which says, "This is what the Lord says, a voice is heard in Ramah, mourning and great weeping, Rachel weeping for her children and refusing to be comforted because they are no more. This is what the Lord says, restrain your voice from weeping and your eyes from tears, for your work will be rewarded."
And that's also a good point where Matthew, I think, is like focused on the Jewish readers, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it would have been a historic, like a minor history detail that only Jews would even know about to verify.
Mm-hmm.
Like some Greek guy isn't going to know about this massacre in a minor town in the middle of nowhere outside of Jerusalem. Like, even you don't know about like half the violence that goes on in your country's little towns. So like, why would a author even bother mentioning it if they're not catering to someone from that area?
Yeah. So Matthew literally quotes that bit from Jeremiah after describing what happened with the Magi. And that brings us to the end of our list and also to the end of our hour. So I hope everybody's clear now that we've, atheists destroyed with logic and fury. And we took an entire trip to the Middle East together and came back in one piece. So congratulations. And it was great to catch up with you again, Lee Templar.
Yeah, I'll talk again more sometime. I have to.
Sure.
I've got a Saturday work to do now.
Well, I hope this was at least a change, if not a rest.
An escape.
There we go. Good. All right. Well, Merry Christmas, everyone. I guess join the Discord. What else do I tell people these days? I don't know. Take a moment over the festivities in the next week or two to thank God for the fact that he sent his son into the world to save us from our sins. This is the Christian kind of, this is the thing that we try to bring to mind, I guess, at this time of the year. Not that that's something that we only care about in December. It's something we could celebrate all year, but whilst you're singing the carols and hymns and whatnot, then it's always worth spending an extra moment to pray to God and be thankful to him for that. Great.
Merry Christmas and a Happy New
Merry
Year.
Christmas.